Hello and welcome back to another video dust tutorial, and in this one we're going to cover the effect called Shatter. So Shatter breaks up your image into fragments, which are controllable with various triggers in the app. Okay, so let's get started. If we bring up some band footage, we have two layers, layer 1 and layer 2. We're currently using layer 1, and within each layer you have a render mode, which we're using quads. And if you were to choose any of the line modes, say lines, line strip, line loop, that size is controllable here in the line size parameter. And if you were to choose points, and then you have the point size parameter here. Bring that up. And you can also choose between square dots or circle dots. So if we go back to quads, on certain modes up comes a poly button, and that poly button exposes the framework within the image. So if we turn that on, you can control the size of those polylines using the line size parameter. And you have a fine button, which on certain looks will smooth out the elements within the image. Then you have the RGB here. Let's turn that poly mode off. You have the RGB and your overall mix. And then you have a depth button here, which we'll get into a little bit later in the tutorial. Okay, so let's cover some other controls within the app. So I'm going to bring up the manual effects slider here so I can demonstrate how some of these other controls work. So if I bring this effect up a little bit, and one of the key elements is the dimensions, the X and Y dimensions. So if I bring the X down, you can see what it's doing here. Or way up. And the Y. So if I bring that back to say 52 where it was. Once again, this is your manual effects slider. So let's keep that up a bit. And you have your amount for your X, Y, and Z here, and your direction. So currently we have the Z all the way up. This is the amount. So if I bring that all the way down, it zeroes it. But if I was to bring the Y up and bring the Y direction, as you can see how that works. And the same with the X. Bring the amount up, and that's your direction. So if I was to bring the slider down, you can see that zeroes the effect. And if we go back to Z, so let's bring the Z up. And you got a little zero button here, which makes it a bit easier to zero all the directions. So let's zero that, bring the Z back up. And we're going to make the direction the opposite way, so it's going to go back into the image. Okay, so that's the trigger mode. There's two other modes. You have an audio mode here, which we'll cover near the end of the tutorial, and we have trigger mode. So trigger mode gives you the time of the trajectory and the scale. So if we turn trigger mode on, so what it's doing, it's scaling. This is a global scale. Now this scale covers all these. This is a global scale. And this is the time out and back. So it's 1.6 seconds out, and if I hit the trigger again, it's 1.6 seconds back. And then below here are your trajectory modes. Let's just pick sort of exponential, and let's get a little bit more time, a bit more scale. If I hit the trigger button, and back. So those are the different modes. Then we have your bloom and your smear. So if I use the manual, a bit more smear, you can see what that's doing. A bit more. And of course you have your XY. And below that you have your refine, and that is your anti-alias on the GPU, which is easier to see if you choose something like, say, line strip. And let's bring up a bit more of the dimensions on the X and Y, and bring the size down. As you can see, it smooths out these lines. And then your live button brings in your live input into the effect. So a good way to see that, let's see, if we bring the trigger back and bring the live mode in, And let's bring the smear down. So if I was to use the manual controller and I want to make it go on the X and Y, so let's zero this, bring up a bit of the amount in the X and Y. And as I bring the manual in, you can see how that starts from a live picture, which is pretty cool, because if I turn the live off, then you have your line mode. Bring that back up. So you can mix to and from live picture. Okay, so let's get into the audio side of Shatter. If I bring some audio in, you have your EQ here to choose which frequency to use for the audio effect. And you have a solo button here to pick your frequency. Okay, and the most importantly is the audio button. So if we turn that on, so that's currently on, and we're not seeing anything because we have the X, Y, and Z all zeroed, and the amounts are zero. So let's bring, say, the Z up, which is doing nothing at the moment because it's zeroed. So if bring it this direction, or the other direction, let's zero that again, and you can do the same for the X and the Y. Okay. Then next to the audio button you have your scale. So this is the overall scale for these settings. So let's bring some X and Y in opposite directions. And I'll show you this scale mode. If we bring that up, as you can see what's happening here. And next to that we have a decay setting. Now I'll show you some presets. Okay, so we've set up a few presets here to go through, a few of which use audio, so let's bring some audio in and bring the mix up. This is using one layer quads with the audio set to scale of 2, a little bit of decay. Next is 10, and this is only using one layer points, and we can use the X and Y in this one. And the next one doesn't use audio, so let me kill the audio. And this uses the trigger mode. 2 layers, line strip and points. It's set to a time of 3 seconds using the sine mode, and trigger that back. And the next one here is crazy squares. It's using points on each layer, quite large point size, set to square, and the bloom is what's giving it the gain. And it's using a bit of RGB split. Okay, well that's Shatter. Thanks for watching.